Hi. I'm gonna wait for a minute because I've not got my old credits. They've disappeared. They've just gone. We don't know where they are. Somewhere in the ether. So I just said, I can't be bothered waiting. I'll just go in and we'll take it from there. It's Monday, isn't it? It is Monday. Is it Monday?
Yeah, it's Monday.
It is Monday. That is not even something that registers anymore. I literally needed to check for a minute. I thought maybe it's Wednesday. That's really bad, isn't it? What does that say about my life? What does that say about my life? Just blending into one. How are you all doing? Hiya Bryony, hiya Claire, hiya Sharon. Can't see people on other platforms even though I can get your questions because people put them on, but hello to all of you because obviously it's not that I'm ignoring you, it's purely to do with that I don't see those other platforms.
Sound's going to disappear for 2 seconds.
My sound's going to disappear for 2 seconds.
Try it now.
Is it okay now? Goodness me, I'm going to have to get myself another glamorous assistant. I mean, just glamorous is probably stretching it with Pete at the moment. He looks something like a dishevelled caveman. I don't think that I've done lockdown very well. Don't know about you guys. Some people, I think, are going to come out richer, better looking, fit, and I'm just looking more and more like an old student. I think that's probably the look I'm going for, to be fair. Just going to have to admit defeat. I'll get on with the questions in a second, but as usually we have the credits running. I just want to make sure that people are on before I begin. Any exciting news, chaps? Anything going on in your life? I have to say, I just cannot wait for all of these restrictions to end completely. I want masks to be burnt. I want restrictions to be lifted and social contact to be allowed again. I don't want ever to hear social distancing again. I don't want to ever hear the word variant again. I don't want to ever see people arguing about what they're going to do to their own bodies. Do what you like. Just don't then expect somebody else to do what you like. That's the way we live our lives happily in a democracy. It's really important that we all have more patience. I'm exhausted with it. I feel like we got Brexit and then we got COVID and everybody's rowing about some elements of it. And today I was finding out that loads of people's families are literally splitting up because one lot wants a vaccine and one lot doesn't. When do we get to that point? I don't remember at any point in my history that I fell out with someone over the idea that they were going to do something or weren't going to do something with their body. It's not normal. Hang on, I've just got some exciting news. Sophie Quayle is on Insta. You're on Insta and you're pregnant. That's amazing. That's the best thing that will ever happen. I'm not even going to lie. Like, honestly, if I could have stopped my life at a moment, it would have been the birth of my second child because obviously I want both of my children. But if I could have just stopped my life at that moment and just like lived in that moment forever, that's what it's like, isn't it? Having babies is amazing. Although when I was pregnant, I didn't do pregnancy really well. I don't know about you guys out there. I'm a really bad pregnant woman. I'm the woman who desperately longs for the labour. I was so happy on both occasions. My first child was premature, had to be induced 5 weeks early because my gallbladder had gone septic, and I was just so thrilled when they induced me. And the second one, when he came, it was just like the best moment knowing that it was all going to be over and I didn't have to carry around that lump and I didn't look good. I wasn't a good looking pregnant woman. Do you know what I mean? But when I went through my first pregnancy, I genuinely didn't know whether I'd actually like having a child. It sounds ridiculous, but I can't have kids naturally. And when they told me I couldn't, I was like, no one tells me what to do. And then I took the drugs and I was pregnant straight away. So arguably, I wasn't necessarily prepared psychologically for it. And all the way through, I was like, a lot of people's kids kind of annoy me at times. Like little ones, not big ones, but you know, when they don't do a lot. And I thought, what if they hand it me and I'm like, nah, I don't think I want this. But they handed it me and I was like, it's the best thing that's ever happened. And I turned to my ex-husband and I said, just remind me on a bad day that I know the meaning of life. And that was it. So congratulations, Sophie. I hope you have a girl. I think it's going to be a girl. I'm predicting it's a girl. I will expect an update and hopefully pictures confirming that I was correct and it is a girl. I'm quitting my job as soon as I get accepted for a new one. Job hunting is brutal, but moving on is good for my mental health and stress levels. Send me good vibes for job hunting. That's Robin on Facebook. Robin, not only good luck for job hunting, but even more than that, congratulations on not being willing to stay stuck. So many of us do it. Honestly, it's one of those things that so many of us do. We don't live for our passion. We don't live for our purpose. We feel like we've got ourselves into a predicament where we can't change things and therefore there's no point dreaming. The worst way to live. If there's one thing that the last 12 months has taught me, it's that I am not going to carry on doing life the way I was doing it. Because really, I just worked and worked and worked. And yes, it's been terrible not having any financial support off the government at all, me or my husband, but it's given me a lot of perspective. One, I did find out that I never was an exuberant spender, which is a good thing because I didn't have a problem to some degree just doing what I've done, which is wearing old clothes and eating cheap food. But the point is, it's given me perspective. Like if I died tomorrow, if any of you died tomorrow, would you look at the last year and think, God, that was brilliant? Even if you got really lucky and you're richer and you're leaner and you've had a year and a half off and you're like, never want furlough to end. The truth is, think about the wider aspect of it. No matter how much money you could pay me, I could not accept that. If they brought in a system where every single one of us was paid to stay at home, I would rather be very poor and just go about my business. Because the one thing that the last 12 months has really proven is that human beings need human beings. I want physical contact with people. I don't want awkwardness when I shake somebody's hand and hug them. I want to get back to normal. Other people are allowed to have other opinions. That's what a democracy is. And whilst we have it, I'm going to say it. Obviously, just to know that my app at the moment, if you're on it, I have got an issue with videos playing. The coders are going to sort it out at some point, but obviously beholden to them. So if you're on the app and the videos aren't playing, I'm sorry, it's just one of those things. It's a bug that's happened. And let me tell you, when you develop an app, you realize that coders are people that you should have been, because it doesn't seem like they often do things very fast, but it does seem like they charge you a lot of money for doing it. That's how it feels. Claire, Smiley, your birthday's tomorrow. 22? 22 years old, yeah? Is that it, Claire? You're going to be celebrating? I hope you are going to be celebrating. It might be school night. But again, if this last year has taught us anything, what's it taught us? Find the joy in the celebrations. It's been utterly hard to do so for a long time. I just had a procedure at hospital last week and flashbacks are really bad. And I just want to end because it feels like the best option for everyone, as I just mess everything and everyone up. I don't know what to do. I'm sorry. If you're having flashbacks because you had some kind of procedure last week, the likelihood is that even though it's really rare, you've just had a traumatic response to it. So we do see people, for example, who go through procedures and they wake up in an anaesthetic. That happens. Although the medical system were like, that never happens. It's like, yes, it does. And now they've accepted it does happen because, you know, people experienced it and could tell the doctor what was happening. So just because somebody says something is a certain way doesn't mean it is a certain way. So let's just put it into context that you were having an endoscopy or a colonoscopy where you were sedated. And even though you were sedated, you were capturing little moments of the experiences, and that's created this traumatic feedback. And your brain's gone into overdrive and is like, what the happened to me? And it's trying to process it. So those flashbacks, whilst they're highly traumatic, are also a part of your brain just trying to piece the puzzle together. So you can do one of a few things. So first off, what's really important is you don't necessarily need to do anything at this moment in time. And you might be like, what's the point of asking the question, Emma, if you don't feel that I have to do anything in particular? Pete, I know my phone's on. He drives me mad. Honestly, guys, if you could see what I actually live with in my household, he is the most dramatic man. Like, my phone's on. You would imagine I just had a grenade thrown into the centre of the room during that question. Literally unbelievable. Patience of a saint. I have the patience. Saint Thomas Aquinas was correct. The arts and gift of patience is patience. I've had to forge it a lot. He's really done inappropriate things as well behind. The gestures that he is doing to me now are appalling. 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 Anyway, so one of the things is to do nothing. I know that sounds really challenging because you want it to end, but trauma often dissipates. You're dealing with an instantaneous experience of it. It's an onset of a trigger that you can actually relate to. You can see when it occurred and why it occurred, right? And like with most trauma, it will fade. And that might not make you feel good at this moment in time because it feels very real. But like I said, there's a lot of probability that it will fade. If it was still there in 6 to 12 months, we'd be talking about something different. We'd be like, okay, we really need to explore this really deeply because it feels like there is more of a link to a traumatic response that is problematic because the post-trauma is quite expansive away from the original origin. So I guess that's one of the things I'd say. Secondly, just talk about it. It's completely okay to talk about it with the people around you. And it's not that you're asking for a solution. It's more about the catharsis of just expressing it. Also, I would genuinely speak to the hospital because if you feel like there has been some kind of post-trauma from that experience, you might want to have a conversation with a consultant who dealt with you because there are things like delirium that can occur when you're not well or you're going through procedures and you're sedated, and delirium is something that can happen if you've had an infection. Obviously, it's something I know because of what happened to my dad, and they can give you some really awful feelings as well. There's a syndrome called post-ICU syndrome, which is something that we don't talk about, which is really, really common when people have been in ICU. So hospitals can be really triggering. So have a conversation with them as well. Of course, speak to your doctor. They're going to be your first port of call. But I would arguably just get on the phone to whoever dealt with that procedure's secretary, and I would be like, this is where I am, this is how I'm feeling, so that you can explore what might be going on for you. Of course, the only other thing that I would say is if you've got unrelated trauma to this actual experience, but related to a traumatic experience in your past, and being sedated and maybe being moved around and feeling like you're not in control, there is always a possibility that those kind of experiences and events can trigger something in us. So you will know that more than me, but if that makes sense to you, it might be that there is an activation feature of a pre-existing trauma that when you've been placed in a position where you don't feel you're in control has been activated. And if that's the case, again, same system, speak to your GP, definitely get a referral for therapy if that's the case. Yes, you're going to be waiting 2 years. I'm not going to deny it, but it's still worth being on that waiting list. So ironic, isn't it, in the UK? We're like, oh yes, we're going to all be like this and about that. But actually, when it comes down to mental health, it's like, how is 2 years acceptable? How are we even allowing this to be the way it is? It's just not acceptable, is it? It's an urgent need when you have mental health issues. It's an urgent need. And if you went in bleeding with your leg gashed open and they were like, that is really serious, if you can come back in 2023, that would be great. It just wouldn't occur. And yet that's what we do with mental health all the time. My frustration grows all the time around this area and issue. It really grows. Why are we not talking about this more? Seems to be a lot of stuff at the moment in the news that is definitely adding to distress and trauma, but for some reason we aren't actually acknowledging it, or we aren't dealing with it, or we aren't deactivating it. And also, we've paid for it. My taxes, your taxes. It's something that I never agreed to. I don't remember anybody thinking that being traumatized was something we agreed to. But mental health is in an urgent need as far as being met. And it's not the clinical psychologists and cognitive behavioural therapists and therapists on the NHS's fault at all. They are burdened beyond belief. Can you suffer with PTSD after an abusive relationship? Absolutely you can. And usually when you're in an abusive relationship, you have a series of coping strategies to just survive. So you're not really thinking about contemplation, you're not reflective in your exercise. The thing about post-trauma, and actually trauma per se, is that often you need a period of reflection. So if you're living and surviving and trying to manage a situation where somebody's being violent towards you or coercively controlling you, then you're kind of having to think on your feet all the time, because what if I say something that offends them? What if I do something that upsets them? I have to constantly reason with unreasonable, and then you have to tiptoe around whatever's going on in your life to try to accommodate their needs so that you don't end up getting harmed. So you don't really have time to sit and think, wow, this is really abusive and I'm feeling really traumatized by it. It's when we stop. It's a little bit like in eating disorders. One of the most problematic stages is healing. Healing is dangerous because things start to go wrong sometimes when we're healing. And when you think about what your brain's job is to do, it's to get you to survive. And part of surviving in this situation is getting to a safe place before we start to explore painful and limiting feelings, because trauma, it makes us feel limited. So what's happened essentially is you've been through the abusive relationship. It was not helpful to you during that abusive relationship to start analysing it because you were stuck. When you've got yourself out of the relationship, there's some distance between then and now, and your brain is going, we're ready to start exploring this. Now that might knock you for six because you're like, whoa, this is months, years after this event has happened, why now? But that's because you're in a safe space where you can actually start to explore that more freely. And that's painful, but it's also good. So yes, you can, but I would also say, okay, what are you going to do about that now? I think that places like Women's Aid are incredible. The phone lines that they offer, the help and support that they give, places like Refuge, all of these charities that are specifically for people suffering from a domestic abuse situation, whether it's during or after, they are a great place to go. They are the place that you can get a real understanding. They know what this kind of experience is and they can help to guide you. Of course, I'm going to say, like I always say, think about having some therapy. If you could afford it, EMDR might be one for you, or chemotherapy might be one for you, or you might just want to go for somebody like me, more integrative, just to go and have chats with somebody. If you can't afford it, it's a waiting list job, but it's still worth doing. So yes, in a convoluted answer there, you definitely can suffer from post-trauma. In fact, it'd be weird in many ways if you got yourself harmed badly in a relationship and then were like, it's fine. That's not how it works. It's deeply, deeply painful. And the other thing to remember as well is your brain is trying to now protect you. So it's probably creating problematic systems that makes life difficult for you because in its way, on an unconscious level, it's saying, don't do this, don't do that, don't trust that, don't trust this. And to some degree, you have empathy and sympathy with that part of the brain that's doing it because it wants to look after you. But if it's limiting your relationships, it's limiting where you go, it's limiting your fun activities, it's limiting your social life, it's limiting possible relationships, then it's over-amplified the need. So you do need to take care of yourself. When you've been in an abusive relationship, you need to heal because otherwise you'll have vulnerabilities and people take advantage of that to some degree. But when you're ready for relationships and so on and so forth, if it's still kind of overdoing that amplification, that's problematic for you. Hey Emma, how do you stop blaming yourself for being friendly to a stranger who came into my back garden to ask if I needed my trees cut back, which led to him stepping in my home, kissed me, and placed my hand on his private area? I just froze. I let it happen. I was friendly to him as we got chatting. Can't stop thinking about it. Did I deserve it because I was maybe over friendly with him? I said no, but I froze with fear. Any advice, please? That's sexual molestation. It's sexual abuse. It's complete violation. I don't know why he thought it was acceptable to go anywhere near you when he'd come round to talk about tree felling or being a tree surgeon. I don't care how flirtatious you may have been. It doesn't matter. You know, you could have been rolling your eyes and flicking your hair and licking your lips. That's not inviting somebody to go near you, and it's certainly not inviting them not only to kiss you, but then to use your hand to give them pleasure, so to speak. No, that's completely controlling and abusive. What would my advice be? My advice would be to call the police. Genuinely. I know that that probably seems dramatic for you because you're probably thinking that somehow you've asked for it. Because if you grew up any time, particularly in the 80s and 90s, that's how women were treated. You were wearing a short skirt, you were asking for it. You were out late at night, you were asking for it. You were drunk, you were asking for it. You chatted to someone in your kitchen, you were asking for it. That's the narrative that a lot of us were brought up on. It's not true anymore, and rightly so. You know, one thing that #MeToo has done is it's brought to light the absolute inequality power balance issue that women face. Of course you didn't do anything. What were you going to do in your kitchen when he came over and grabbed you? You weren't going to fight him, were you? He's obviously a burly guy. He does stuff with trees. You're not going to throw him off you for fear that he might harm you. You don't know what would have happened next. And even if he just got all the signals completely wrong, the point is, you said no. And even if you hadn't have said no, I'd still be questioning anybody who felt that the boundaries were so lax that he felt entitled to do that to you. You don't have to go to the police, obviously, but understand that you have an absolute reason and reality to be able to do that. It's absolutely, unequivocally unacceptable what he did. And you are the victim in that situation. Do not blame yourself. You can look and talk and flirt. Not that you were flirting, but I flirt loads. I love flirting. It's not that I want to have any relationship with the person I'm flirting with, whether that's a male or female. It's just that I like flirting, you know, having a laugh, having a chat. It's kind of just part of who we are as human beings. And it doesn't mean there's anything sexualized or desiring in that situation. It's just fun, isn't it? To be a bit flirty and fun. So stop blaming yourself. Don't feel guilty. This is the whole narrative that women are brought up with. Because you're objectified, and if you're attractive, or you know, people consider you attractive, even if you don't consider yourself attractive, women are constantly objectified. And so when a woman has a man overstep the mark like that, she questions herself. Think about what you'd be saying to a friend. You'd be like, you what? The guy came in your kitchen, basically grabbed you, kissed you, and made you fondle him, and you said no, and that made no difference. I mean, you must be really scared. And I think understand that the violation is real. And secondly, I imagine that that's making you feel really vulnerable in your own home now. So all of those feelings are completely normal, aside from the ones that are, am I guilty? Should I feel shame? No, you are not guilty. You should definitely not feel shame. What can you do about it? You can definitely have a conversation with the police, or you could speak to a charity about it who deals in these kind of issues. Rape crisis, for example. I know that hasn't happened, you haven't been raped, but nonetheless, it doesn't mean that you can't have a conversation with somebody who understands sexual violation. But what you don't do is go, how could I have stopped it? That's what we do all the time. It's not your accountability, it's not your responsibility, it is his. And I'm just glad that it didn't get any further and you weren't harmed anymore. But what you've been through is horrible. Hi Emma, I need some advice. My friend isn't coping well at the moment. I'm really worried about her. She lost her job last year due to the world situation and has been slowly going downhill since. She says it's because she's feeling lonely and unworthy. I try to go and see her as often as I can, but we live in different towns and I work part-time. Recently though, she's been talking about suicide and even told me on the phone how she'd do it. She doesn't really like to go out either, so not getting any social time apart from when I visit. Obviously, it's really worrying and I don't know how best to support her through this hard time. Any advice is a blessing. Wouldn't it be nice to all have friends like you? That's the first thing that I'd say. You're a really good human being. And even though you want to change this situation for her, it does feel like a situation where you're powerless to some degree. And that isn't because all the great stuff that you're doing isn't having an impact. Of course it's having an impact, you know? She can call you and talk to you honestly about her suicidal feelings. She can see you because you bother to go around even though you work hard and live in a different town. She can confide in you because you're open for that. So you do a huge amount to bring added value to her life and situation. But the bit that you're powerless over is you can't make someone change. It's really frustrating, let's be honest. I mean, wouldn't we just all love that? Everybody's like nodding, looking at the partner. Yeah, it'd be great if we could just change everything about the bits that we don't really like. You know, that's the way that life is. We feel that and it makes us feel powerless, but it's not our job to do it. All we can do is support that person making choices that might be better for them. So I guess, how can you manage the suicidal ideation? Well, first of all, definitely take it seriously. There is a much more significant, really, really much more significant statistic where someone is actually telling about the fact that they want to kill themselves. So a lot of people will say they're doing it for attention. A lot of people will say, but they're always talking about it and therefore they won't. Actually, that's not it. It's an incremental shift for a lot of people. So when people are talking about wanting to kill themselves, we take that absolutely seriously. And it sounds like you do. SOS is the charity I'm ambassador for, and you can call them and get her to call them. She doesn't need to leave her house. She can text them as well. There's also the Shout service. So they're two services that don't require her to leave the home, but definitely offer options of support where she can just talk to them and have a conversation about her feelings, which will reduce some of those feelings of isolation. Then, okay, she doesn't want to socialize outside at the moment. That needs to be worked on ideally. She lost a job. She's had her confidence bruised. So I guess one of the questions that you could ask her is, if you had a magic wand and you could just make life the way that you want it to be, what would it look like? I often ask those kind of miracle questions. I want somebody to identify and point out, if they had power, what would their life look like? And the reason that I do that is kind of a shortcut to seeing what people's hopes and dreams are. And they don't get away with it, I don't know. You know, nobody gets to say, I don't know with me. It's always like, well, we're going to figure out this knowing together. So I'd ask her that question. I'd be like, okay, you feel trapped at the moment, you feel lonely, you feel afraid, you feel poor because you've lost your job, you feel all these things, your confidence has been knocked, and like, we get that. But let's just take a step outside of the self. Let's just play with that for a few minutes. And now I want you to express to me, what would life look like? How would you know that life was okay? How would it feel? What would it be like around you? And that will help her identify goals. It might be, well, I'd have another job and it would be in childcare. And I'd go out twice a week with a group of friends. And even though this is all in imagination, the minute we start talking about that and creating that kind of vision is the moment we start walking towards that vision being achieved. So I do that. So you've given her some strategy. You've also given her the option to think about visions and purpose. Then I'd also think about a suicide plan, as in, how do you, if you're feeling suicidal, manage to reduce that fear that you may go through with it? What's the strategy? What's the plan for managing it? And that may be on the fridge, call 999 if you feel suicidal. Call me if you're feeling suicidal, but you're not going to do it, but you need to talk it through. Call SOS if you're, and doing that kind of strategy thing. Get your bag, walk outside, get an Uber, come and see me. Those kind of things really make a difference. Also, I'm going to say what most people would say to you. You can't carry a burden for somebody else. You might want to, but you won't be helpful doing it. You'll exhaust yourself, you'll get compassion fatigue, you'll feel terribly guilty if something happens because it's beyond your control. So try to reduce the guilt. I really mean that. Just try to bring the guilt down, that you can't just solve these problems. It would be lovely if you could, but you're doing enough now. And also, the thing about people in pain is that sometimes, even though they don't realize that they're draining the resources and time that you have, it's sometimes really important to be aware that if it's becoming too much, it's not because they're trying, obviously, to drain your resources, they're just desperate. But if it's becoming too much to the point where you actually don't want to actually be around that person, it can become really counterproductive. So do make sure that you have some really clear boundaries around when you'll see her, how often you'll see her, and what that seeing her looks like, just for self-protection. How can my daughter deal with her night terrors after escaping from an abusive, coercive relationship? It's definitely PTSD. Night terrors are absolutely horrible. I'm just going to divide them because I think people think that night terrors are just bad dreams, but obviously night terrors can also be something called sleep paralysis. So my husband suffers from sleep paralysis, which means that he is completely awake but unable to move and is still seeing all of the things that are around him that are highly traumatic. So it's like being trapped in a body, living your dream whilst feeling completely awake and unable to move. So I don't know whether that's what your daughter's going through, or whether when we're talking about night terrors, it is the classic screaming in the middle of the night when they're having a terrible nightmare. It's very common with post-trauma, as are flashbacks, as are insomnia, as are a whole range of issues that are caused by a traumatic response. And I guess one of the things that you've got to think about is it's not that you have a lot of control in this moment to cure those issues, because part of this process, a little bit like when you go to bed and your brain is clearing out the toxins. So one of the reasons that we know that we sleep, and we didn't know for a very long time why we slept, but now we understand that what happens is the body detoxifies, particularly the brain area. So it's like a cleansing system. That's why it's really healing for people. So that's why sometimes you wake up in the morning and you're like, that was amazing. Do you know, when you just have that peaceful night's sleep? Obviously, none of us have had it for the last 12 months, but that feeling of contentment and refreshment. These days, I wake up and just go, oh, like a lot of us do. But you know, that kind of resting is lovely. So the first thing you've got to think about is, okay, how is she working through that trauma in daytime? So at night, her brain's trying to work it through. So even though it feels like a punishment, it's just the way that her brain is trying to manage the trauma. Like if she's not confronting it in a safe place in the day, then when her unconscious and subconscious has the availability to start exploring it, that may well happen at night. So what kind of systems are in place for her? Is she having therapy? Is there a possibility that she could afford some therapy? I say EMDR because that can work very quickly with trauma. Is there some kind of support plan around her? Could she join a local group who also suffer from trauma? Because these are all things that start helping an individual to have a place and a space for the emotional dialogue and the emotional catharsis to begin. It's almost like creating a system so that the unmanageable is still relatively unmanageable, but becomes more manageable because of the strategies around. So I would explore looking at those options. And then healthy bedtime habits. I know that we all pretend that we have them, and I also know that most of us use our phones as our alarm clocks or have TVs in our bedrooms. So what is her living experience when she's going to bed? How tidy is her room? How organized is it? Does it smell nice? Has she got aromatherapy oils? Before she goes to bed, does she have a nice warm drink of chamomile? Does she get in a bath? Does she relax? Does she journal so that any of her negative feelings that have built up in the day can be expressed safely and positively in a space where she can cathartically remove some of that excess baggage? They're things that can really, really help. The same as I always talk about anchoring. So, you know, anchoring can be done with your thumb and finger when you're visualizing particular things that make you feel better, but also it can be done with oils like peppermint. I would say try to think about positive things with peppermint on a tissue, and then always carry peppermint around with you, you know, like albus oil. And if at night she then puts that on the pillow, often that can help the brain to again connect with positives as opposed to negatives. And finally, I'd say just give her the best advice regarding the fact that these terrors, they're not there to harm her. They're just there to help her process. So whilst it's really horrible for her, it's also a way of healing. That's a difficult one to swallow, but if you see it that way, it becomes a little bit less scary. How can my daughter, oh, that's the same one. Hello, Emma, I love your YouTube videos. Thank you. Oh, I love doing my YouTube videos. Thank you very much. You've watched them all. Loving it. In your true crime videos, you make a really, really good point of making sure that children are taught from day one to scream and kick and shout to strangers. I do, that they don't know the person who's trying to pester them. I'm a mum to a beautiful little girl who has autism and completely non-verbal and incredibly loving and trusting to people, including strangers. How would a mum like me teach my daughter to act defensively in that situation? She's always in care, but things can take seconds, can't they? It terrifies me to the core. That's a really, really challenging one, and I'm not going to lie, because I have a friend whose daughter is also one of the loveliest girls. She's not a girl anymore. She's like 20, but I remember her when she was a baby, you know? And I remember in the park when she was maybe 2 years old, she would just go wandering off to go and sit with other people's picnics. And that was a part of her autistic trait. So to some degree, it's less about what you can do to empower her to do those kind of things, because to some degree, that might not be something within her character that's easily absorbed. But maybe it's more about like, how do you make yourself feel safer about where she is and who she's with. And I guess there are quite a lot of devices now that are out there, from things like Kid Logger, which is an app that's on a phone, which means that you can kind of know where your child is. There's also things that you can get for clothing. I'm not suggesting, by the way, guys, that we all go and tag our children. You know how I feel about our privacy, but this is a different case. So you can actually get things that are put in the clothing, because it's not even about you then ever thinking that something terrible is going to happen. It's just about you thinking to yourself, well, as long as she is safe, where as far as I know she is, I don't have to worry about worrying where she may be, because I understand that. Aside from that, a good thing to do is dolls. I mean, she's non-verbal, but she'll still be able to scream. So helping her to kind of see that in play work, if you could get, I don't know what kind of dolls there are anymore. Let's say Bratz, when I was growing up with my kids, and Action Man. Not that it necessarily is men who are the baddies, I get that as well. I'm being very stereotypical. But if you can like enact those kind of things with her through play and get her to scream, those kind of things are helpful as well. I guess another thing that you could do, and again, I don't think that your daughter's ever going to get taken. I really don't. But if you actually written a note that she could hand over as well, because at the end of the day, if somebody was trying to take somebody away, then arguably if she has something to hand, like a note that she can kind of like hand to a passing stranger, and it just says, this isn't my mummy or daddy, please call help, then that might make you feel more reassured. But I genuinely think that your fear is more that this could happen, but the likelihood is minuscule, because it sounds like she is very well taken care of. I also want you to know that in spite of the fact that I do talk about teaching kids that, we are less likely now, with all of our population increases, to see a child abduction than we were in 1970. There are less, so rare. It's so rare, like unbelievably rare. So try to reframe those feelings. This is more about the love and compassion and adoration you have for your gorgeous girl, and the fact that she doesn't have the same opportunities to protect herself than she would do if she were in a situation where she were verbal. But play work is really helpful. I always used to do play work with kids, because I found that firstly, when I was side by side with them, like playing with dolls or playing with teddies or doing things that were talking about kind of sexual abuse, etc., when I was working in therapeutic dynamics in that way, it was so much easier to be doing it kind of with dolls and like chatting away in a non kind of, I suppose, interrogating kind of way. Obviously, you're in a situation where she's non-verbal, but that doesn't mean that you can't be the verbal in that. Also, just to say, if there are any specific practitioners that are around you, like at school, or if you are under any clinical psychologists or educational psychologists or any of those, it's also be really helpful to find out off them whether they would recommend anything, because I'm sure that they'll have lots of suggestions. Hi, I've been waiting to ask for a long time. Can children lock memories of abuse away only for them to come back on years later? So, there has always been a massive discussion in the therapeutic world as to whether repressed memories are real or otherwise. So basically, there was a situation where, shall we say, a group of children were taken away from home, but actually it turned out that it was the therapist to some degree who had helped to evoke and plant memories in these children, which led to incredibly painful experiences for the children, because of the fact that they actually then felt that they believed what had happened and it had to be really deconstructed, and it caused this kind of rift where people were saying that repressed memories don't exist. So where I stand on this is, if you are having memories and no one has influenced those memories and they are starting to be triggering for you and you feel that you are remembering things, well, that to some degree isn't really repressed memory. It's memorizing at a point in time where it's safe enough to do so. However, if you're in therapy and you feel that somebody is potentially putting these ideas in your mind, then that's a really vulnerable place to be. And that's something that we always have to be very careful of. So I don't know where you are on that spectrum. If you're in a situation in therapy and you feel that the person is indicating or kind of making assumptions that maybe you have been, that can be a very powerful issue. And you can find yourself almost thinking, well, maybe that would be what happened, because maybe that's why they're saying those things or kind of pushing me down that way. And it's not that I'm trying to blame the therapist in this situation. I'm saying that, you know, sometimes we don't understand how we make assumptions about people and then how our behavior can impact on that. But as far as, could you be walking down the street one day and suddenly go, oh my God, and then it hits you? Yeah, of course, absolutely. That to me is something that happens very regularly, because our brains have to protect us. And sometimes our brains will protect us in ways that we wouldn't ordinarily as an adult choose, like locking off areas of who we were. If you think about being a child, it would be too overwhelming, wouldn't it, to remember everything from when we were born? I mean, imagine how the world would be. It'd be full of giants. We'd have absolutely no control over our own limbs to some degree because we're little babies. So our brain does a lot of that work anyway. It does a lot of filtering out things that we don't need to remember or we don't want to remember. When we get into like 4 or 5, think back. I bet you can remember quite a few things, but not really specifics. So again, it filters out a lot. In fact, that's what the brain is. It's, no, not a sponge really, it's more a sieve. You know, we make jokes, don't we, that my brain's like a sieve, but it really is. It kind of lets go of most things and then it holds the bits that are key. So it could have very well been something that you've hidden away or been aware of but not wanted to explore. The bigger question to ask yourself is, okay, why now? And am I prepared? Or do I just need to kind of sit with this and just let it evolve into whatever it is without analysing it too deeply? That's a lot of stuff that I've just said. I can't answer your question is what I'm saying, obviously. I don't know what your memories are, but certainly be prepared if you're going to go down that route to have the foundation and support around you that you need to start exploring that kind of really challenging stuff. And if you're going to do it with a practitioner, make really sure that they're very, very qualified and that they've dealt with people who started to have traumatic memories, okay? That would be one bit of advice that I'd really give you. Can you give me any tips on how to choose a suitable and reputable therapist for my 15-year-old daughter who is struggling with anxiety? I've Googled, but there's nothing to me if they're any good. We haven't seen the GP only because I'm aware there's a wait, so I'm looking privately. Any help greatly appreciated. So if you're going for therapy, I would go on the BACP. There's a register, which is Registered Psychological Therapists, and you can kind of look at people in the area close to you that might have specific areas like adolescent mental health, anxiety, and so forth. That would be helpful because then you kind of know that they're qualified and you know that they've got experience. But what I would really want to do is I want to like have a 10-minute conversation with several of them. You're going to know as a mother, you're absolutely going to know as a mother what kind of a connection your daughter needs. And at 15, it can be really scary. You know, my son, after my dad, went to one therapist and it was just really awkward for him. He just didn't feel like the silence was good. He didn't feel like it was an easy experience. It was awkward for him, and I knew that that was never going to be something that could work because he needs more of a collaborative conversation. He needs somebody to make it more simple for him to express himself. So you will know as a mother, and any practitioner worth their salt should give you 10 minutes on the phone for free. That might be contentious if people are listening and you're practitioners and you're like, I don't want to give 10 minutes for free, but I genuinely think we should. I think it would be miles better for you to get a feel for that person and a fit for that person. In the meantime, though, I'd also explore what you can do with her to reduce some of that anxiety. Because remember, anxiety is often temperament-based as much as it is experiential. So we are born to some degree with some temperament, and we manipulate that positively often, but the point is it still exists. She's had a really shitty year. I mean, I don't understand what we've done to children. I don't understand what we're doing to children, but I won't stand by and accept that it's been okay. And I won't stand by and be silent on this issue, because children absolutely have been sidelined to such a catastrophic level that most of them are feeling that the world right now isn't a place they either recognize or feel that comfortable in. And the absolute bias that has occurred when you look at certain sections of the community versus other sections of the community. You know, some kids have watched their parents earn no money for a year. You know, some kids have watched abuse in their homes become more and more problematic. I mean, it's insane to me, but this is where we are. So I think your daughter's lucky. She's loved. You care for her. You've obviously got resources that you're willing to invest in her. So there are lots of positives there. But if her anxiety level's gone higher because her temperament's naturally sensitive, then this year has been a pounding for her. So how can we reduce that? Because remember, she's on high alert when she's anxious. She's got that dread in her belly. She's got that fear around her, and she's just thinking that everything's going to go wrong. So to reduce that, it's more about doing things like meditation. I would really strongly recommend that you do that with her as well. If you go on my YouTube channel, it's not my crime channel. There's another one where I've transferred my hypnosis stuff and my meditations. There are some specific teenager ones, and I think there's one on anxiety actually. Just go and do that with her. If you can do that every single night, you don't just have to listen to me. There are others available. But if you can do that every night with her, that will start to help reduce that cortisol and adrenaline. It will help to just really start to balance that better in her brain. You can also go out for a walk with her every single evening, side by side. You don't have to talk about her feelings, just chat, chat, chat. Get them outside, get them in fresh air, walk with them, spend that time with her. And then, of course, if you can get a therapist by chatting to them and thinking, this is the one. This is the person that I think is going to be able to help my daughter move through these feelings. Because you do want that connection. You know, I think that unless I walk into a practitioner's office and I feel like I'm instantly in a comfortable slipper, I don't want to be there. And that's not because I'm not going to be challenged. I can't be challenged if I'm uncomfortable. I just can't. Like, you can challenge me a lot. You can say difficult things to me. You can express that you disagree with me. As long as I feel comfortable around you, then that is going to be something that's going to help me a great deal and help the relationship really grow. So those are the things that I do. But BACP, there's a register, and also just look for people who specialize with teenagers and anxiety. That's one of the things I do as well. And of course, even though you're going to pay, it would not be a bad thing to still speak to your GP, because they might think, well, a CAMS referral would be good. Also, look at apps like Headspace for kids, teens, etc. Because again, I do all that stuff for free. There is a subscription for Headspace, but you know, there are some really good things on there that would be effective for her. I was just wondering if I could have some advice, please. We've all just found out that my best friend, we've been friends since we were 16, 17, now 41, has cancer. It's all been too quick and I don't know how to cope with that. Since about Christmas, she told me it was fibroids, then they did another test and found it was cancer. They're messing about a bit for a while. They still stuck to the diagnosis of fibroids until she persisted the docs to make tests more urgent. 2 weeks ago, it was confirmed as ovarian cancer that had spread to her bones. But last week, she was admitted to hospital with a DVT. She then got moved to oncology. They gave her a diagnosis of stage 4 ovarian cancer that spread to her lungs, bones, and possibly liver. Has kidney damage, and as the cancer has spread to her bones, it's caused a fracture in a vertebrae. She's in so much pain. They can't start chemo that was meant to have started on Monday, as the kidneys wouldn't take it. Today they rang me to say her prognosis is terminal, outlook is very poor. Why do I feel horrendous guilt? I should be the one that's there. She's never been ill, whereas I've had a lot of long-term health problems and always in hospital. I can't get this out of my head as to why. I can't go and see her due to the pandemic, but I also don't want to go and see her as I want to remember her as I knew not before her illness made her. She's incontinent, can't work, and in excruciating pain. I can't see her like this. I lost my best friend to terminal cancer, exactly the same cancer, spread to the liver. I nursed her through it, but I also know exactly how you would feel not wanting to see what happens, because particularly with liver cancer and at that stage when it's in the bones, she's not necessarily going to be that conscious a lot of the time. They obviously make sure that they're on morphine constantly. And my best friend, we went out and got the pathway to death. That was literally what it said on the label. It was pathway to death. Really strange. But my husband had to go and pick it up. It had to be like prescribed properly, and they come round and injected her. And then over a period of hours, she died. So I guess there are different levels to what you're going through. The first one is you're shocked. Like, your best mate's gonna die. It's horrible. She's 41, she's young. Secondly, you're angry with yourself because you're thinking to yourself, well, it took so long, you know, maybe if I pushed her harder, maybe I should have made her do something quicker. But it just doesn't work that way. It just never works that way. They thought it was fibroids, they got it wrong. The NHS makes mistakes. You know, it's not uncommon that people get misdiagnosed or wrongly diagnosed or don't get diagnosed at all until it's too late. I lost one of my close friends from childhood a few years ago, spent the last 2 weeks with him. He was literally covered in tumours, but just been sent back time and time again. The guy was like golf balls all over him. So the reality is that part of this guilt, it's not really that you need to feel any guilt, it's that your brain's trying to process control. It's like, well, what if I had done this? How could I have solved that? It's a way of kind of making you believe that if you'd done one thing, that could have led to a different series of events. It just doesn't work. You'll just torture yourself with that. If you don't feel that you want to see your friend before she dies, then as long as you can make peace with that, that's completely acceptable. I would suggest that if you could get at least a phone call with her, just so that she can hear your voice before she goes to her next dimension, I wonder whether that would be helpful for you. Because it's one of those things that you never think you're going to face. And it's catastrophic, the feeling. It really is, I get it. But it would be nice for her to hear your voice. Even if she's not properly conscious, we do know that hearing is the one thing that remains very present. You know, what could you do to let her know you're thinking about her? Whoever her family members are, can you get in contact with them so that one of them can go and visit and maybe put some songs from your childhood, some tunes, some things that you used to dance to when you were kids? What can you do that will just let her know that you're present with her in your absence? Maybe write a letter so that she can hear from you. If you do something like that, even though that's not going to make peace with the loss, of course it's not, you're losing your best friend, it will give you a sense of spoken words with meaning. It will give you a sense of allowing her the knowledge of how you feel about her and the love that you have with her. And when you remember her, you'll remember being able to have that exchange. And I think that's so important. That's my personal subjective belief. You know, I really sat and just told my best friend how much I loved her, just constantly. And she was really naughty with me towards the end. She was really naughty with me. But it just didn't matter, you know, I just sat and took it because I was just so blessed to have this person in my life. And the thing that I'd say to you as well is we just don't get to make these choices. Life's not fair. It just isn't fair. And it doesn't have to be. It's a fleeting gift of consciousness. And some of us get it for a long time and some of us get it for a short time. It's got no rhyme or reason. Bad people have excellent things happen to them. Good people die awfully. There's no rhyme or reason unless you create that rhyme or reason for yourself. Personally, for me, if you had said, you get this girl, you get to grow up with her, you get to have all your firsts with her, you get to dance in her kitchen every Saturday night, you get to laugh like you've never laughed with anyone before or since, but she's going to die when you're still in your middle age. Do you want that girl in your life? I would have been like, damn straight, I want that girl. Like every single memory that you've got with her, just cherish them. Okay, you got to go on the rest of the journey without her, but that doesn't take away one moment of meaning from the journey that you've had with her. And your paths are going to separate now for a period of time. But like I say, those invisible threads, they're going to be there. But I do something ritualistic, like I said, like writing a letter or calling to speak to her or sending her some cheesy pop and getting the family to put it on, just so she knows that you're with her. And you are with her. You're with her in a spiritual experience. Can you give me any tips on how to cope with a stalker, please? Ooh, I've contacted the police and they can't do anything until he is caught in the act. I'm really scared and petrified. I don't know who I am anymore. He's ruining my life. I don't know what else to do. So I would not be happy that the police are saying that they can't do anything, and the idea that they have to catch him in the act, that just isn't how it would work, because they can't catch a stalker in the act. That's why the person's a stalker, because they're watching you, you're not watching them. It's not how it works, is it? You'd be the stalker if you knew where they were at what point so that the police could come. There are things that you can do. So for example, I would take pictures, I would video it, I would write notes, and I would keep details. And I would do that because specifically you want to make sure that you are recording the times that that person is harassing you. Take stalking very seriously. This is what you need to do and you are doing, and if you're not being taken seriously yourself, that needs to change. There are harassment and stalking laws now that are considered very, very important. Pete, can you just look up stalking and current legislation? Because there have definitely been some changes and I am not au fait with them, but I would be really worried if the police were just saying to you there's nothing that you can do. I also know that stalking, it can be somebody who was in your life before, or it could be a perfect stranger. Either way, what needs to happen is that you feel some level of safety. And the police should certainly be talking to you about some protective mechanisms, like, for example, giving you a pack where you have at least an alarm that lets people know if you're in danger, or suggest some kind of things that you should be doing to kind of record this information. I mean, I would be upset if I was just told to go on with my way. So like I said, digital footprint is really important. So can you make sure that your phone is always available? And if that person is stalking you and you see them, take pictures of them, take video footage of them. And that's for a few reasons, because you're going to give them a direct message. You're going to be like, look, I am now going to be in control because you think you're stalking me, but I am now putting you in a situation by doing this that means that you are going to get into trouble. You really need to get that stuff because of the fact that it's completely unacceptable that anybody is stalking you. It's one of the most terrifying things to go through. Absolutely the most terrifying things to go through. It's absolutely horrific, the idea that somebody's following you around and watching out for you and finding out things about you. So absolutely do that. Secondly, like, make sure you have a strategy. So who's on your safe call list? You know, if somebody that you know is going to be able to come round straight away, if that person's near you or coming to your house or doing anything like that, what's your list? Who are you speaking to? What's your strategy? You need an escape plan. All those things are important. Don't wait for things to escalate. And even though this might all de-escalate and they might disappear, the point is have a plan. What is your plan? Make sure that you have people aware of exactly where you're going and when you're going to arrive. And I mean that. Be diligent. Be absolutely diligent. Don't just go to the shops and not tell somebody, even if that's your mum, your dad, your sister, your brother, your friend, say, I'm going to the shops. If I'm not back in however long, call the police. Or if you don't get a text off me in the next 30 minutes, call the police. I mean it. Be that specific. I know that's dramatic. I know that's probably a massive amplification of where it's ever going to go, but always plan for the worst in these situations. A bit like the government with the pandemic, a plan for the worst, and that's how they do it. It's worst case scenario planning. So do that because your life matters massively. And whilst I'm sure that it's not going to get to that point, it's like I said in one of my crime docs the other day, I remember going to it was basically a self-help defense group. And I wish I could go back and shout at the instructor. I really do. Because the instructor said that if you were being attacked and raped, it would be better not to fight because essentially the likelihood is you wouldn't get as badly injured. Now, 20 odd years later, I'm like, what stupid advice. Because a rapist doesn't want to murder you, right? They don't want to murder you. They want to rape you. So therefore, the more resistant you are, the more likely they're going to struggle with that. However, if they're a serial killing psychopath who wants to murder you, you being, okay, I won't do anything, yes, I will go with you, that's going to end very badly. So to me now, it's like actually be prepared and do battle in that way. That's just my personal subjective opinion. Other people's opinions are allowed. You don't have to agree with me, but I'm a fight like hell kind of girl. So remember, get that strategy in place. Where are you going? What time will you be back? And make sure that people are aware of who this is. Get pictures of them. Put them around your friendship groups. You're going to make him exposed so that you are safe. And do not let the police just send you away. I don't get it. I don't get it. I think it's so poor, that idea. It's absolutely poor. We saw a girl, get murdered by a boyfriend. She'd had a bloody warning off the police for harassing the police because she kept saying there was a problem. What are we doing with those situations? I've got no idea. Anyway, tune in on Wednesday. I'll see you.